I hope you can see the famous 15th century icon painted by Andrei Rublev in the 15th century. It's a painting of the three men at the Oaks of Marmara, and at the same time a painting of the Trinity. There's been plenty of debate about who is who, but perhaps that's to miss the point, because this is not so much an image of the Trinity itself as an image of the theology of the Trinity. The story tells us of Abraham dozing in the midday sun when the three men appear from nowhere. But he doesn't wait for them to approach. He runs to greet them. He bows to the ground and asks if they'll do him the honour of letting him bathe their feet and sitting with him. He orders his elderly wife, who I think is probably the heroine of this story, his elderly wife Sarah, to go and bake the bread and cook a whole calf's worth of veal. And then the men dine under the trees. Abraham exemplifies hospitality. Because certainly then, if not now as well, if you see a stranger wandering in the desert, it's not enough to wait for them to ask you to help them. You go and you meet that person with enthusiasm. You beg them for the honour of a visit, no matter who they are, and you feed them with the best of what you have. The Lord responds to Abraham's hospitality by giving him the most prized reward in Abraham's culture: fatherhood. And Sarah, who cooked this lovely feast, will have her disgrace taken away. She's going to bear an heir for her husband. After all, there will be healing. The importance of hospitality is underlined by the contrasts with the next story. The Lord tells Abraham that he's heard that Sodom and Gomorrah are such bad places that he's considering destroying them. The men turn towards Sodom, and the next scene has two angels arriving at Sodom and finding Abraham's nephew, Lot, sitting in the city gateway. He gets up and bows, but there's no enthusiastic going out to them. He invites them for a meal, but there's no particular abundance. And then the men of the city arrive and surround the house. "Where are the men who came to you tonight?" they say. "Bring them out so we can have sex with them." And what does Lot do? His response has, in the chauvinistic customs of his day, a certain level of good manners and breeding, I suppose. But it's not a holy response, to say the least. He offers to throw the neighbours his two virgin teenage daughters instead. "But don't do anything to these men, because they are guests under the protection of my roof," says Lot. As a slight aside, it's interesting, isn't it, that this has become a proof text for those who want to outlaw homosexuality. But this isn't about a couple of lads interested in initiating a close and loving relationship. This is the threat of gang rape, and Lot thinks the way to stop this is to throw his virgin daughters to the baying mob. There's a lot wrong with Sodom, but we've no reason to think that it was because of gay marriage. Anyway, the vast majority of the text is about hospitality. Abraham doing it right, Lot doing less than the bare minimum. and the citizens of Sodom wanting to abuse and exploit the strangers in their midst. This text is about running to show hospitality to strangers who need it and having respect for the safety and integrity of the vulnerable, to help and to heal. Let's come back to the picture. There's a space at the table on our side. We are meant to be drawn into this fellowship. And as we gather today, whether in person or linked by technology, we are a part of the Church Universal. We are conservative and liberal, lively worshippers or given to introspection, a spectrum of different appearances, different abilities and disabilities, yet we are one church and we worship one God. In the picture, the different figures incline toward each other in an attitude of perfect harmony. None dominates another round the table. We need to pay attention to the empty space at that table. It's an invitation to come and meet with God. And as Abraham reminds us, that is about rolling out the red carpet for those who are strangers to you. So not just maintaining our fellowship, but running out to greet others. Henri Nouwen, who was a great spiritual writer, wrote this: hospitality means primarily the creation of a free space where the stranger can enter and become a friend instead of an enemy. Hospitality is not to change people, but to offer them the space where change can take place. He was writing from where he lived in a L'Arche community, L-A-R-C-H-E, the Arch. There's a branch in Ipswich who work with people in sort of social situations, running clubs and what have you, and also some residential work. But their work is undergirded by a culture of shared lives between people with and without learning disabilities, from which they can together build a more human society. So it's not about being done to, it's about being part of a group where change takes place for everybody. The hospitable space is not an easy place. It's more than a smile as you give out a hymn book and inviting the new people to come round to the hall for a cuppa. It's costly, physically, spiritually and psychologically. All you've got to do is ask some of those who've opened their homes to Ukrainian families. It also involves us overcoming the very natural reaction of putting up barriers to those who are different to us. We've had it brought to our attention in a forceful way in recent months, with the floods of desperate refugees fleeing war, that the practice of hospitality can be literally a matter of life and death. In truth, we've seen it for many years, but many of those refugees struggling across seas and our channel didn't look like us. So in the first instance, hospitality does involve offering food and drink and shelter to the stranger. But it's actually a much richer concept. It's an attitude, a habit of the heart that we can cultivate and nurture, and from which rich actions naturally flow. Now, doesn't that sound like the sort of church that you'd be naturally drawn to? It sounds like the kind of church that could quietly change the town. It sounds like a church universal that could perhaps change the world. And the first step is being drawn into the triune God and accepting with gratitude all that God has done for you. For Abraham and Sarah, offering life-giving food and drink ended up with God offering life itself in the promise of a son. And having accepted with gratitude all that we have got, we then work with the church in its holy diversity to offer that relationship to a difficult and divided world. Hospitality and hospital. Host and hostel. They all share the same root word and have the power to unite and heal. Hold on, my friends, to those words from the book of Hebrews. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares.